When did these big banks first start coming to Charlotte?
Well, it's sort of a long history of why these banks grew up in North Carolina. The first big reason was in the early 1800s, banks across the state were allowed to branch and have multiple branches around the state, which you couldn't do in a lot of different states. So the banks here started getting a little bit bigger than maybe some of their peers around the country. And the first real big bank was actually in Winston-Salem, Wachovia. And then over time, the banks started getting bigger, looking to get outside of North Carolina, and the banks in Charlotte really started catching up to Wachovia. And the two big ones were North Carolina National Bank, which became Bank of America, and the other big bank was Union National, became First Union, and those became the two big banks in Charlotte, and were sort of competing with each other, doing deals, making acquisitions, and a lot of the regulations about going outside of state boundaries eventually came down and they got bigger and bigger. Now we have Bank of America is the biggest bank in the country. It's based in Charlotte still. It's obviously had a lot of troubles lately, has more than $2 trillion in assets. The other big bank, First Union, actually merged with Wachovia and took the Wachovia name and then really got into trouble during the financial crisis and almost failed. And that bank now is owned by Wells Fargo out of San Francisco. So in theory, the only big bank still based here is Bank of America, although Wachovia, as part of Wells Fargo, they actually have their biggest employee base is here in Charlotte. So Wells Fargo still has a really big presence in Charlotte.
You mentioned some of the problems that they were having. What were some of those?
Well, both of these banks really, grew through acquisition over time, and then both kind of stumbled on their last big acquisitions. Wachovia bought a lender called Golden West Financial out in California, kind of right at the top of the housing bubble. Had a lot of mortgage issues that they inherited, about $100 billion in mortgages. A lot were in California where housing prices were really falling apart. They had some investment banking issues as well, but that really put them in trouble going into the financial crisis. Then Bank of America had bought First Countrywide Financial, which was the biggest subprime lender, and then Merrill Lynch, which was the biggest investment bank. And a lot of concern initially was about the Merrill Lynch deal, and that led to a government bailout and a lot of congressional hearings and a lot of hand-wringing about what happened there. Now the Countrywide deal is the one that's really causing a lot of problems because of all the bad mortgages they still have. There was just a lot of drama during the financial crisis. Wachovia over one weekend in 2008 was literally ready to fail, and they're trying to figure out who to sell it to. Initially they were going to sell it to Wells Fargo, and then they backed out. Then Citigroup was going to buy it, and then Wells Fargo came back with another deal. And there was moments where really Wachovia was close to failing, and they weren't sure what was going to happen. And then another deal would come through at the last minute. And then when Wachovia switched from Citigroup to Wells Fargo, there was sort of a confrontation between the lawyers on Citigroup and the Wachovia side, and said, we're going to sue you for billions of dollars. And they're like, we know. And they eventually did, and they just settled not too long ago for about $100 million.
What effect would that have had on the city of Charlotte and the state of North Carolina?
A big effect. We saw from 2008 to 2009, we lost about 3,000 financial services jobs, which equated to about $1 billion in wages. Some of that started to come back, but you still have lost jobs. Some of the investment banking jobs, they're not going to come back because they're some of the mortgage-related type stuff they're doing that no one really does anymore, which is probably a good thing. A lot of the mortgage companies around here, there was a big mortgage hub of other companies, they had trouble. The couple positives we've seen is some big companies have come into town and said they're going to create offices here or move operations here and take advantage of some of the financial services folks that are here. Smaller firms have spun off from the banks, investment bankers and private equity firms. So we probably have a more diverse financial sector, but we sort of definitely lost. It was just kind of a sting to lose one of our big banks to a bank in California and to go through all the pain that happened here.
What has having all of these big major banks here in the city, what has it done for the city of Charlotte?
It means a lot. I mean, the banks over time, they kind of grew up with the city, and sort of the leaders of the banks really worked on building the community. Hugh McCall, who was the CEO of Bank of America, was really known for building the uptown area and trying to improve the art scene, and it was out of their own self-interest. They wanted to recruit people to get people to move here. First Union, Ed Crutchfield, the CEO there, kind of the same type of thing. They're trying to build up the city as they're building the banks. when one bank would build a skyscraper, the other bank would build a bigger skyscraper, and they'd go back and forth. So that kind of helped build the skyline over time, and they've helped build arenas and attract sports teams. So it has a really lasting effect on the city, and we'll see how everything goes forward. The Democratic National Convention is coming here, and the leader of Duke Energy was actually the leader who helped bring that here. So we had an energy company instead of a banker sort of doing a big civic event, and so that was kind of a change for us. I've been covering the banking industry since 2001, which right when First Union and Wachovia were merging, which was sort of a big deal for these two big North Carolina banks to merge together. Then saw a lot of the deals they did over time, and then we were kind of in the thick of it when the financial crisis was unfolding in 2008 and 2009, and now we're still really paying close attention to Bank of America. Just last week, Warren Buffett decided to invest in the bank, and so that was a boost of confidence, but it's sort of an expensive investment, and there's still questions about whether they have the capital they need to get through all their losses and to meet certain standards they have to meet. And then Wells Fargo and Wachovia are kind of finishing up that merger, and so we'll see the Wells Fargo signs actually show up here in North Carolina, and this Wachovia name that goes back to like 1879 will kind of be washed away. So that'll be kind of a bittersweet moment for North Carolina.